I'm a geologist, a prospector, went to school of mines, Haileybury, finished my degree in Lake State, well, many years ago. And I got involved with the MPA to affect change. What I can say, and I'll go right to it right away, and I want to get some feedback from you folks here, that although the MPA is a sister to the OPA and all the other groups out there, we're one of the more active ones out there with respect to lobbying the government. Between the MPA and the OPA, this is why you have a GIP and OGIP program. Gary and I put that together, and with the help with others out there, but it was a pretty tough job, but unfortunately, nothing was done for the prospector. That happens, and we started that with Rickford, and then we pulled it off and worked through Fideli's office in North Bay, and then eventually Rickford helped us out to move forward, and of course now with Peer. What I can say is that the government took a long time to get themselves worked out from when they were M&DM and over now to Ministry of Mines. It took about 7 or 8 months to figure it out. And of course, all before that was all the COVID issues I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So what happened was in the last 4 or 5 months, Minister Peary's office has been very aggressive. And so they've been working with us and the OPA to work on permits and plans, assessment work, policy initiatives with respect to where we're going with the whole ministry and how we are seeing ourselves as explorations. We try to explain to the government that we're at a tipping point. You know, they're great on pushing critical minerals. They excite everybody, but there seems to be all toward the development end and very little to the exploration end. We've been trying to push that. Unfortunately, under the Conservative government, which has been very business friendly, so you know, that's the way we experience it. They were more on bigger concept, bigger projects. And of course, the ministers passes new legislation with respect to more along the lines of development, but it doesn't help us on the exploration side. Not on, and if you read what Harry Barr said today with New Age metals, he's absolutely right. It's not happening. And what's being forgotten, that's the junior side, but at the grassroots level, we're being devastated. And up north, we got more projects that are shut down because of situations with First Nations issues, and of course permitting because of those issues. So we've been able to sit down with the minister's office and work out an awful lot of details to try and work out changes to permits and plans, changes to assessment work. We've been very successful. I hope that you're going to see this translate into new policy and new changes in your regs here. So that's what we've been doing at NPA. And I want to announce today that and unfortunately, because of COVID, the last symposium that was actually put on was through Timmins with the Porcupine guys back in 2020, January 2020. We're going to be the first out to shoot. We're going with a symposium on October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, coming this fall. And it's tentatively called Critical Minerals, Green Metals, and Gold. So I was talking to some of the government people. They like the way the acronym behind this. We're going to play with a little bit more, but we're inviting you to come and check out our symposium, and hopefully you'll enjoy that, because it's been long overdue, because the OPA hasn't had one since before COVID, and the only thing we've had either were like the Timmins Mine Show. It's not quite the same, right? So we're trying to get back at that. I know that I'm supposed to meet with the Porcupine guys, and they want to do one next year. So this is all good news. We're starting to retool ourselves. Now with the OPA, I recognize it's been quite a challenge. There's been negative feedback, and I understand it. One of the things that was really well put together was the work by Josh Bailey, where we were looking at retooling the OPA from the ground up. And we recognize that we lost so many numbers. We used to be around 1,100 members in the NPA, or sorry, in the OPA. We're down to probably a third of that, maybe a quarter. That's how bad it is. And so, and then of course, there's been rumblings and certain organizations have pulled out, like Porcupine. I even heard the Sioux did too. So we're trying to save it. And part of this has to do with cooperating with the groups and communicating better. So it's up to guys like me on the board to try to communicate this to Gary Clark to move forward. Now, in all fairness to Gary's been through some serious illness, and he lost his father there about 1.5 years ago. So neither here or there, we all have losses in our families. I've had more in my share too. Point is that we're now at an inflection point that if we don't get money into our sector and don't streamline the rules and regulations, we're not going to be able to develop deposits. That's what's happening. And yet there's such a big move for it. And yet Ontario is, and this is from other organizations outside the province, we feel like we're the laughing stock of the exploration industry when we should be the leader. It's not happening. So we have to rethink how we do business at the OPA. And one of the things we're looking at doing is actually changing the name and reaching out to a wider tent and bringing other exploration activities, that being the diamond drillers, the service providers, the contractors on all walks of life. They're involved with exploration, not just prospectors, because the prospecting community is very small now. It's changed and it's never going back. Secondly, we're working on possibly, I see in Kirkland Lake right now, there's actually a private group headed up by Todd Morgan, who's done well with Kale Gold. And he's got a private fund for prospecting it's piloted in the Kirkland Lake area. So I've talked to him about possibly doing a public-private partnership with the different prospectors groups, and maybe to try and do this right through the province. So I don't know where that's going to go yet, but it's on like he's got it going, but it's new, right? So we hope to be able to get that financed where you'd have money come from the province matching up with private funds and replacing the OEC. The OEC still exists, but it's not doing well. I'm not on that board, so I don't know what's really going on. It's got a separate entity. But I will say that the message is pretty clear. We got to change. So I'll stop there. Fire away with any questions. It's the time to do it. Questions? Come on now, guys. You guys. Yeah. Todd.
Well, I think you're right about the prospectors. It's a smaller group, and I'm more in the cleaner exploration companies, which is where we need some work going on. Sure about your ideas about branching off, taking us that direction, but I always felt like the junior companies between the Ontario Mining Solutions and the junior companies have always been lacking in the resources, and that's where I kind of think that part of the industry really needs help. I mean, you can find prospectors that have projects or generate them, but it's really tough for these junior companies, having the experience of being one, to keep things going and to fight the different battles with permits. We need help. We need assistance with our plans and permits. We need some assistance, technical assistance. We need help finding people, and the OPA never really focused on junior.
No, it didn't. No. But what's interesting, Todd, is the work we did to get the OGIP benefits the junior sector. And I could tell you the request wasn't a couple $1 million. The request, like I asked 15 million per year, just like that. And so we just need to get in. The way they did the first with the JIP program, they went through the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund, and it was a disaster on administration, because see, in the past, when it was OMIP, you went direct to the governor. There was enacting legislation by the province That's what happened to OPAP. And actually, Grabowski once told me, he said that ran out for OPAP in 2012. The government wasn't, don't matter which party's in there, are not going back to enacting new legislation to do a new prospectors grant or one for the juniors. So we had to step up in some fashion. At least we went through the Heritage Fund. Okay. So this time it's a little bit different. They got a little more experience, and even though we got it over a couple of years, it's nowhere close to the numbers that we want, but as for the greater tent, the junior companies is going to be a major part of that. There's no, yeah.
Or was it suggested the government will keep 5% of the revenues generated by mining back into exploration? As they're incentivized to sell that.
Well, look at one thing for sure. We're looking for any and every idea that you can humanly have out there to pitch it to the government. Okay. Like there's some suggestions here that with the $50 fee for staking, as an example, for a claim, that a certain percentage would go to the First Nations, because we get a lot of feedback from the First Nations. They're grouchy about they're not getting enough. Well, they're when you stake a claim, they're notified, but there isn't enough incentive by the government for whatever the reason, revenue sharing. So we need to reinvent ourselves how we handle that right now. And I agree with you on that. So any idea is not a dumb idea, because some of the crazier ones sometimes make it. But I know that if you're looking at something where it requires enabling the legislation, it's just a non-starter. We have to work within the existing parameters of the government. Here's something you don't know and never heard of. And when I pitched this to Fideli, he's a friend of mine, and I said to him, well, how do we get a certain amount of money? Well, I asked 15. He said, we can't do that. I said, why? And I said, well, because he used to be head of the Treasury Board in his first term. And he said, the problem with the Treasury Board is that if you're beyond $5 million, then it's got to go to the Treasury. If it's below $5 million, it doesn't go to the Treasury Board. You just go through the Heritage Fund, through their board of directors, and that's it. Oh, I said, wow, okay, we'll have to do what's the easiest way to do this. And these are the type of parameters you find out after talking to them, that sometimes the government is kind of hamstrung on what they can or can't do. And that's one of them. That's an example. One of the things we've been pushing hard was a Made in Ontario flow through program. Still want to do that because, we're up against Quebec, Manitoba, the East Coast. They're kicking their asses when it comes down to exploration. And why? Because they have better programs. But you got this government going out there pushing the exploration, the whole critical minerals activity across the province, as if it was the second coming, for heaven's sakes. And guess what? We're not out there being able to find deposits. It's one thing development. We got to find our darn things first. I can go on forever about, let's say, First Nations, and I'll tell you, it's been the most difficult we've ever seen in the last 6 months to a year. It's off the rails. I don't know what it's like down in Sudbury, but as soon as you get north of Kirkland Lake and up into the northern part of the province and then over to the northwest, see what's happening there is that one of the things we do is we push the narrative to try and reduce the idea of stopping withdrawals on lands because you don't like what's going on, because you put a caution on there. And that's killing exploration, because I lived through that one in Tamaga. And it killed exploration and development for native and non-native right across the area for 25, 30 years. You don't want that. The other one we caught their pants down with the government here, you like this one, is that the Nature Conservancy of Canada has been cutting deals with the federal and provincial government. And what they've been doing is they've been taking patented land that's from the forestry sector and then creating withdrawals on those lands to kill mining in those areas. Why? Because there's a mandate for 1 million acres of stopping exploration mining in Ontario. So it's easy to get patented land, but what they're doing is sterilizing a lot of land. This happened up in Hearst. Like this happened with Domtok, $32 million, practically a whole township. And that's BS. That hurts the industry.
Move on.
I know.
To
I can go on for hours.
Gino will be here to answer any.
Yeah.
that was gonna be my last one. This
I'm
is your last.
So, I'm not hard to reach, but, you can see how passionate we are. It's a tough call.
For you, all right.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to Kaylee and the SPDA for the opportunity to give a little bit of presentation about Wesdome. I've just recently started with Wesdome in the beginning of the year, so my apologies if I had to go to my script notes a little bit. I don't know everything by heart yet, but yeah. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much. So Wesdome Gold Limited is basically we're striving to become a mid-tier gold producer, and obviously starting off with typically with all presentations just the quarterly statements, and obviously any statements or forward-looking statements or information that's provided should be taken of caution. Looking at two Wesdome properties, I think tonight I just want to give a little bit of an overview of the two properties, where they are located, talk a little bit about the geology, and obviously a little bit about the exploration potential we have at both of the properties. Eagle River Mine is located about close to Wawa, in the Wawa sub-province. It's in the Mishubishi Greenstone Belt. We look at the Kina Mine, which is Quebec, a typical part of the Abitibi Greenstone Belt. Sorry for that. Just a bit of a company overview on Wesdome. We had the Eagle River Mine has been in operations for many years, and recently we started a ramp-up program in Kina. And the whole aim of the company is basically to ramp up Kina to ensure that we become an all-Canadian intermediate gold producer. Did a little bit of stats on both of these mines. We've got Kina Mine, which is located in close to Val-d'Or in Quebec. We reported commercial production in the beginning of December to 2022. Typical underground. 2022 production, we produced about 29,000 ounces from the mine. 2P reserves, about 600,000 ounces, about 11 grams a ton. M&I resources, exclusive of reserves, is about 113,000, that's 4.8. And then inferred resources, about 760,000, about 5.9 grams a ton. Eagle River Mine, location close to Wawa. We are in producing stage, typical underground. Last year we produced about 82,000 ounces. 2P reserves about 400,000, that's 16 grams a ton. M&I resources about 186,000 and inferred about 281. And then obviously just in terms of what we think we can produce in 2023 is about 80 to 90 at Eagle, 30 to 40 at Kina, combined by 110. You can look at the head grades of 11 to 12 at Eagle, 3 to 5 at Kina, and then obviously try and keep our cash cost per ounce between 1,500 and 1,670. Promise this is the last slide on a sales pitch for Wesdome, but looking a bit of a company overview. So typical company goals for 2023 is to deliver on our guidance that we produce to the market and reducing debt top priorities. And we probably want to try and achieve that through complete the Kina ramp up. And that is basically to ensure that the Paceville plant, plus we focus on the ramp development down the Kina deep zone. And then obviously that will allow us to ramp up to acceptable levels according to the PFS. And the fact with Kina becoming into ramping up Kina will basically allow us to become more more mature company as well, and it will allow us to become more as well into sustainable mining going forward. And then just other ones, obviously, financial, looking, accelerating the balance sheet. We always lean on technical strength. We try and train our people, technical talent, procurement and supply chains. And then lastly is obviously building on sustainable mining at Kina, forming an independent technical board on tailings and mining. And then lastly, just obviously, safety is always a priority at a company. Okay, there we can look at Kina mine. I think most of us are probably quite familiar with this. So the Kina project are located in the Valdor Gold Camp, just west of Marban and just west of Goldex, east of Marban properties. It's close to the Larder Lake Cadillac Fault, and as we're all familiar, gold production from Abitibi probably in excess of 100 years, and I think in excess of probably 200 million ounces to date. Just looking a little bit closer at the Kina mining complex, about 15 minutes from Valdor. We've got this between the Goldex and the Marban properties. Historically, the Kina mine produced up to 1.7 million ounces from 1981 to 2013, and at the average grade of about 4.4 grams a ton. What we currently found as we go deeper and focusing on the Kina deep zone, our grade increased to about 11 grams a ton. So we definitely see increase in gold grade as we go deeper. Most of our infrastructure is on what we call Parker Island with the lake surrounding the properties. This property infrastructure comprise of a 950 meter shaft. We've got a ramp up to 1120 meters below surface. The production from the mine stopped in 2013. Since then, the company did an active exploration program, drilling in the deeper portions of the mine. And then obviously pre-feasibility was completed in 2019. And then, as I mentioned previously, commercial production started in December 2022. Just a little back on regional geology. I think we all, as I mentioned, quite familiar with the Abitibi belt. Kina is more or less located on the southern portion of the belt. We've got a lot of east trending succession of folded and faulted volcanic sedimentary rocks. And then obviously a lot of east trending ductile brittle fault zones. And obviously with the Kina property more close to the Cadillac Larder Fault. Zooming in a little bit, looking more at a property, we see that we've got the blue more or less is the outline of the Wesdome, the main Kina complex, mining complex. We've got a number of zones surrounding it there. In the more of the center of the property, we've got what the Kina deep zone at the moment with the existing old mine. We do find that there's from south to north, we find the Kina complex areas on lane by lithologies from the Pontiac group, the Pish group, the Cadillac group. We find that the Kina deep zone is more what we call in Chocola group. And it lies between the two major faults called the Marbanite and the Norbanite fault and the Marbanite fault. And typically gold mineralization within the property is very familiar with the orogenic type gold deposits. We're familiar with other vein type deposits in the Abitibi in terms of composition, mineralogy, and hydrothermal alteration. And we see that gold mineralization occur in mostly all of the rock types, except in the Proterozoic dikes, but is more common in intrusive bodies and basalt. And we tend to find as well where the gold is concentrated, where you've got a composite contrast between your competent basalt and your adjacent deformed comatiites or your chloride talc schists. And then within the property, there is probably to date we probably found about 63 mineralized zones within the total Kina mine zones, and we do see that most of them are either located close by, often associated with subsidiary shear zones, which may be proximal or adjacent or host to the mineralization. And alteration minerals are dominantly albite, carbonates, and pyrite. And we do find some lesser chloride or silica associated with that. The Kina Deep A zone was first intersected in December of 2007. Since there's been drilling off, and obviously at the moment, the main focus of the company is to get our development down to the Kina A Deep zone to start mining that. And what we've seen to date is that it's actually a transition from more sulfide to less sulfide mineralization going down deeper down the mine. Just another picture looking at some of the regional structures that we find on the zone with overlaying of the magnetics, the mag. We've got what we call the Marbenite fault. We've got a Norberite fault. We've got our model vein, mineralization veins located there. And then from 8 to 8 is sort of a cross section just showing the steep dipping fault zone going towards the north. And then we can see basically that most of the majority of mineralization is associated with the Marbenite fault. Sort of interesting, as I mentioned previously, we tend to find historically from 1981 and previously they were mining sort of these upper regions, the south zone, the East 50 zone, the north zone, the VC zones. 1.75 million at about 4.5 grams a ton, mostly associated with sulfides, pyrite, pyrrhotite. And as we're progressing down, we sort of see coming down to this area, we're starting to see this transition happening from less sulfides, seeing less sulfides associated with mineralization, and it's becoming more coarse streaks. Typically, more quartz vein instead of sulfide-rich material. At the moment, typical intersections we do see here at the bottoms we're getting about 28 grams a ton at 0.5 meters, 72 grams a ton at over 0.3 meters. There's a 46 grams, 54 grams, and then obviously 36. And we do expect as we go deeper, and our drilling does confirm it, that it seems like the mineralization is continuing down plunge. Sorry, excuse me. Excuse me, on the right hand, just a picture of Kina Deep development. We do see we've got your porphyry dike as a hanging wall, we've got your ultramafics at the bottom. You do tend to see your very sheared quartz within the vein area. There's a couple of grab samples that were taken, 184 grams a ton. There's a 43 grams a ton. Get a little more of amphibolite and alteration happening here. And then interesting enough, although it looks intentionally sheared, we do see there's continuity across that in the veins. We had a master student who conducted a study for us, basically on looking at the mineralization and alteration, and Stephanie Kobylinski, and basically what we're seeing from here at looking more at the upper levels of the mine, the south zone, we do see a lot of pyrrhotite and pyrite alteration. We see as we go to the VC zone, which is also in the upper part of the zone, we do see there's a lot of pyrrhotite. Going down, we still see pyrite. And then obviously as we go into the S50 extension zone, we're starting to see there's pyrrhotite and pyrite. We're starting to get some bit of albite alteration happening in the core. And then obviously here as well, going down as well, we're starting to see a little bit more quartz going in. And then obviously there's some, if you look closely, probably not seen on photo, but there's a little bit of probably gold mineralization within that quartz. Just some more pictures. Obviously now we've moved down the different zones. We are in the Kina Deep zone. Starting to see we're getting a lot of quartz with the basalt. Quartz plus albite with the basalt. We still get some quartz on that one. Quartz plus muscovite plus albite. Typical chlorite, albite, carbonite. And then just probably confirming with this that as we progress down, as the grade increases, we're getting more quartz-rich mineralization, and obviously we're getting less sulfide mineralization. And as I've mentioned previously, probably above here we had about 4 grams a ton over time, and down here we're probably running about 11 grams a ton on average. Just looking a little bit more at sort of the change in lithology and mineralization of the mine. You can see here on the left-hand side, just showing the location of the drill hole. The drill hole is more what we call in the S50 zone extension. We can see that the basalt is normally brecciated. We're getting albite, biotite, sericite, and chlorite alteration that normally happens here. So you normally have your torches coming through. There's a little bit of VG there. Then we've got some of your basalt coming through, more of your torches, and then probably normally quite brecciated. You do tend to find that we normally get about 3% disseminated pyrite within the quartz, albite, carbonite, pyrite veins. So typically above sort of the transition zone, which runs more or less up here, you still see some disseminated sulfide. Then obviously just another picture showing that. So obviously we can see there's quite the big sheared breccia type of mineralization you find within a sheared breccia. And then obviously still with mineralization, there's just a big, just an enhanced picture of that little area. And then obviously then we could probably see there's some, although not so clearly visible on this, but there's some visible gold within the S50 zone as we transition down. Just moving down the sequence, which we probably now more into what we refer to as the deep A zone. In the deep A zone, typical sequence consists of basalt, feldspathic porphyry dike. We've got schist. We're getting chlorite, albite, amphibole alteration happening. And then obviously we're starting to see more of the quartz-rich vein type mineralization that's happening. And then obviously we do see some visible gold within particular quartz. as well. You can see probably here the diamond drill there was 78.4 grams a ton over 8.7 meters. Just again, looking at some more detail, some sections of that particular drill hole. We do see we've got the basalt, it's about the porphyry dike schist, and then obviously there you can see probably some visible gold, though probably quite difficult to see on the screen, but obviously we had 232 grams a ton over 1 meter. And this one we had almost 39.3 grams a ton over 0.7 meters. Just looking a little bit at the vertical and plan view of the deep A zone geometry, we do see that we get these isoclinal type folding happening within the ore body. With the Kina deep zone, there's multiple lenses. So we've got what we call basically the A zone going through. We've got the A1 zone, A2 zone. We've got a higher one, ZA. So there's multiple lenses in this particular structure. And then we've got a couple of what we call the basalt footwalls. And then you've got a footwall zone 1, 2, 3 coming. And typically looking at grades that you find within the geometry of the zone, and you can even see looking at your vertical view, you see that sort of isoclinal fold type structure happening there. Typical, you've got 7.1 grams over 4.3 meters, looking at that drill hole, about 16.5 grams over 4.7 meters, and again about 7.8 grams a ton over 4.2 meters. And then obviously you can probably see, looking at more sort of a close-up section, that we can see we've got the main deep zone, and then we've got some footfall zones also associated with the deep zone. And again, interesting enough, if you're looking at that drill as well, we're looking up from 3.3 grams a ton up to 20.3 grams a ton. Just in terms of the Kina mine, so looking at near mine exploration for Kina, we at the moment, obviously we do think they do extend down plunge in multiple of these areas, the south zone, we've got the north zone, the VC zone as well. We've got intersection of about 36.4 grams a ton. We do see that even Kina A zone extends down. There's a couple of good intersections we got close by down. This down closely at depth was about 46 grams a ton, of 11 meters, 54. On the B zone at depth, we've got about 28 grams, 72 grams a ton with 0.3 meters. And then obviously focusing on your near mine exploration would definitely be down plunge. As soon as you get any opportunity to drill down, we would do that. These are more or less, we've got the Norbenite fault, the Marbenite fault coming down here. We've got the Norbenite fault coming down here. And again, you can see mineralization associated with these fault structures. A little bit of a close-up view just of the bottom portion. If you're Kina A zone coming down, and obviously we do believe they're down, there we've got a good intersection of about 6 to 9 grams a ton. Here we got about 9.9 grams a ton over 83 meters, 15.5 grams, 10.8 grams a ton over 7 meters. And then obviously we do believe both the footwalls and the main lenses that we should expect down plunge extension of the mineralization. Looking at the bigger Kina mine complex. So we've got the Kina mine at the center of the complex. We've got multiple zones that has been identified over time, which we more or less says we've got the Marbenite fault coming down more or less in this direction, the trending in this direction. We've got the Norbenite fault more or less trending in this direction. And then we've got these north-south disruption structures that's coming through. And more or less what we're seeing that we do tend to find that we're getting some additional mineralization associated where we've got these north-south structures coming through. We've got what we call the S196 zone. We've got the Presqu'île zone. We've got the Dubizon at this area. And then we've got what they call the Southeast Shorty 10 zone coming here. And using this basically as guidelines, you will target your next potential areas which you can target for exploration. So just looking more or less at this, so we've got just a bit of a bigger picture in relation to your landmass. We've got Turkina on that side. We've got Presqu'île up there. We've got the old Wesdome drilling. We've got El Cisco mine, Sullivan mine. So overall, apart from the Kina mine, we're currently targeting the Deep A zone. There is multiple zones which we can in future target as well at Kina. Going a little bit into the Presqu'île, which was more to your northwest. So we do tend to find that these sort of indicate the modeled mineralization, modeled veins that you can find in Presqu'île. That is a very preliminary interpretation of what we think is the S196 zone. Finding Presqu'île allowed the company basically to say, well, we could potentially, using Presqu'île, we can start putting down a ramp which we can connect basically with the underground workings. Very conceptual mine design. We will put down a ramp coming down, and that will allow you to create a second outlet for your mine. At the moment, it's just a vertical shaft at the moment, but potentially, if this is viable, you could potentially do your ramp down. So Presqu'île is definitely at the moment there's a couple. We actually do have a resource on Presqu'île, which we had to report this year. Just looking more or less on a longitudinal section, there's a couple of lenses or veins within the area. Probably looking towards the north, we do see there's some intersections of 4 grams. There's a 27 gram a ton intersection we got into the zone. There's another 14 grams a ton. There's another 27 grams a ton. There's a 44 grams a ton. So definitely potential going forward to look at this particular area. And then just looking as to the west, we do see the sort of the angle, the sub-vertical angle they dip at. And then in addition to sort of drilling this off, we do believe as well that there should be continuity down dip as well of this area of this area. It's the next zone that we're probably next zone that we're probably looking at is your Dubizon zone, which is more to your southeast, the area. So again, we've got a couple of lenses coming through. Still within the morphology, we've got komatiite, schist, diorite, basaltic komatiite. There's about 3 lenses at the moment that we have drilled off. Drilling up to about, you've got a 5.4 grams over 18 meters. You've got a 5 grams over 24 meters. There's a 9.8 grams over 25 meters. So another potential future area we can look. The main thing with the Dubuisson is that we've got an underground ramp, underground drift from the Kina mine up to the Dubuisson area. It has been developed about a 2.5 kilometer long drift that we can actually target this area for future from drilling from underground. Typically what we're starting to see as well here, that we're starting to see you've got quartz carbonate, there's some tourmaline veins coming through. Quartz carbonate always shows some alteration as well within this. Just looking at your plan view, it's more or less striking in a southwest to northeast direction. And at the moment, there's more or less 3 lenses that we've identified. So just to give a snapshot, so obviously we've got the Kina mine there, we've got Presqu'île is more or less up here. We've got Dubuisson around here, that's another potential prospect for us. Just looking at more or less the ounces we've got. So we've got the Wesdome deposit, we've got some inferred resource. We've got the old Cisco mine, which produced up to 800,000 ounces. Past production, we've got the Sullivan mine, the Dubuisson zone, we've got inferred resource of up to 730,000. And what we found of late is what we call sort of our southeast Shawkey 10 zone, where we're starting to see that that's more or less your fault, that's more or less your gold trend happening, associated with the Cacia, with the 2 major fault zones within the Kina area. And then we're starting to see in this area that we're starting to get tourmaline veins coming in. Starting to see that the alteration changing slightly from the Kina mine, and we're starting to see quartz tourmaline with albeit alteration coming into the southeast. Then looking at the previous one, obviously this is where I referred to that Shawkey 10 southeast area, where we're starting to see, which makes us quite excited, is that we're starting to see that we've got that particular hole where we had 2.0 grams a ton over 72 meters. So we're starting to see a change in mineralization from the Kina mine, where we have these narrow veins coming more towards areas where we're starting to see low-grade material at extensive widths. Basically, if you look there, that way was where the old Shawkey mine was, we still had your narrow vein. We're starting to see the diorite basically becoming very thick, and there's mineralization associated with that. And then obviously just looking at some of the values, we've got there 3 grams a ton over 20 meters. And then obviously, as I mentioned, if you look at the core from there to there, we're looking at about 3 grams a ton over 20 meters, and more or less having the quartz carbonate with the tourmaline coming into the alteration in this particular area, which is probably very similar to our next door neighbor, also having similar type mineralization. And just lastly as well, looking at this at the Dubuisson, that we're starting to see there's obviously some BG within this particular area. We've got some samples, 49 grams a ton over 1.3, 7.6 grams a ton over 1.1 meter. That's just a short overview, a little bit on the Kina project. How do I look for time? Am I good for time? Okay. Just looking at the Eagle River. Eagle River obviously associated with in the regional gold. We've got the Hemlo there, we've got the Sugar Zone, we've got the Island Gold Mine. There's Wawa, about 50 kilometers west of Wawa. At the moment, Eagle River, there's an open pit. We've got the Mishi open pit. We've got the Eagle River underground mine. At the moment, the Mishi open pit is on care and maintenance, not in production. Obviously, to date, about 1.1 million ounces, about 9 grams a ton. And just some stats on, we've got a mill that currently produces about can process about 850 tons per day. And then we probably 25 years plus production from Eagle River, and I may think that's a little bit more. I think we probably 30 plus, if I remember correctly. So just looking in terms of sort of a close-up view, we've got your Mishi open pit here at the top. We've got your open pit here. You've got your processing facilities, and about 15 kilometers south, we've got the Eagle River mine on the southern portion of the Mitsubishi Greenstone Belt. Just sort of a picture you've got there, sort of your mine area, and there you've got a picture of the plant. Just in sort of regional geology on the Mitsubishi Greenstone Belt, so we've got sort of in the Wawa sub-province. It's about a 50-kilometer syncline going through. It's about 16 kilometers from north to south. Comprised of number of felsic to intermediate to mafic volcanics and metasedimentary rocks. We've got some granitic intrusions coming in sort of the middle of the area. There on the top of your sort of deformation zone, the Mitsubishi deformation zone sort of run there on the north side. There's the south side of it. So we found that the Mishi pit is sort of straddling on the northern portion, and then your Eagle River mine onto the south. The supercrustal rocks are typically part of the green schist facies that's happening, and then, as I mentioned, we've got the felsic. Just looking a little bit closely more on property geology. As I mentioned, probably the Mishi area is more towards the north of the belt, and then the Eagle River is more towards the south. The north is more or less on the northern part, consists of clastic sedimentary rocks. And then we've got some felsic tuffs associated with that, and then mafic flows. And the Mishi pit area more or less lying on that contact between the sedimentary and the volcanic rock. We've got the old Magnacorn deposit as well there, that area. The southern limb area more comprised of phyletic basalt and calc alkaline andesite. And then we've got some minor interflow classic sedimentary rocks, and we do find there's some chert magnetite iron formations as well in this area. Let's skip for me. Looking sort of the lithological and structural setting of Eagle River, I think today we'll probably just focus on Eagle River as Mishi is currently not in operation. So you've got your main deformation zone coming through here. We've got you've got your mafic volcanics, you've got your felsic volcanics within the deformation zone. Within, you've got what we call your diorite intrusion there in the middle. Your mineralization are mostly associated with the diorite. If you look there at all these red lines, is sort of is the outcrop of the veins. We've got some diabase dikes, more or less running north-south, running northeast to southwest within the area. And then we do tend to find that your mineralization sort of more or less runs parallel to your deformation. We do tend to find that a lot of the faults are brittle, ductile singularization faults, and as well as some brittle post-modulation faults as well. This shows you more or less the deformation trends based on a based on an Aeromax study that was done a couple of years ago. And then obviously you can see you've got your trends as well, your rest are sort of your D1 deformation trends. Then you see they more or less follow similar. That's more or less your trend that gets followed. That follows. We find that the gold are more or less associated with the quartz vein deposits in proximity of normally of the faults in the regional zone of deformation. We find a lot of these faults strike sort of an east-west direction. You do find that there's some fault striking obviously in a north-west to southeast direction as well. Historically, we found that the bulk of the mining over the last years happened probably in around what we call this diorite intrusion. So multiple of your quartz veins zones are within a diorite, with the exception of we had the 2 zone and the no-name lake and the 3 zone that was outside in the volcanics. More or less, this diorite stock for 2 kilometers by 0.5 kilometer. Like I said, the bulk of it was produced 1.1 million ounces. Of late, what we see, the 300 zone and the 700 zone has trended outside of the diorite into the volcanics, which makes us quite excited about it. Finding new deposits parallel to the current deposits in the volcanics. Just looking at a vertical section, you can probably see we've got zone 7 steeply dipping, plunging towards the east-northeast. And then that demineralization rate. And there's obviously just that 7 zone, just a photo of the outcrop of the quartz vein on outcrop of the 7 zone. And then, as I mentioned, obviously now with the new discovery outside of the mine, diorite, it opens up new ground in the volcanic rock for us. Just a plan view of the model mineralization vein. So we find mineralization steep plunge towards the east-northeast. There's this sort of the outline, the model outline of the diorite stock. And as you can see over time, the bulk of the mining probably occurred within the diorite. And of late, we're starting to see that what we call the Falcon 7 zone, we intersected within the volcanics. There is what we call the 311 zone, which is partially in a diorite, partially in the volcanics. And as we probably mentioned, the theory at this stage probably is that the shape of the diorite and control mineralization is due to this sinistral strike slip faultier zone that's happening. That you're finding, this is just basically a model on the strike slip. You find you get your sinistral strike slip, we get some shortening happening over this. We get there's your less stepping releasing bend. And then obviously, as you can see, your veins align parallel to this field shortening direction. So there is your historic veins that was mined. And this provides us indication where we sort of see these yellow, potentially based on the model, potentially we can say ore shoots with steep plunge that may provide this additional material. So just a longitudinal view of the model mineralization veins. Just again showing your diorite stock, and then obviously with your veins coming down. So we've got what we call the 300 zone, this sort of the 8 zone, the 6 zone, which was that was your historical mining. And then as a new development, we're starting to see this Falcon 7 zone being identified and developed outside of the diorite. Just looking at a geometry and ore plunge of the 300 zone, which is more of a blow up of this area, with the red dot showing your grade above 10 grams a ton. Obviously, just confirming the plunge, ore plunge, more or less to the east northeast. We tend to find that most of these veins varies the thickness from 0.5 to 2 meters. We find locally that some of the veins do actually fold back onto themselves, creating these S folds, or what we call the ballrooms. We call the ballrooms, and we find that sometimes that mineralization is up to 15 meters thick. And just lastly as well on this slide is just to see that drill information does confirm mineralization to extend down plunge at depth. Typically, well, what we see in some of these veins is what we call these blowouts, the thickening happening due to your strike slip, you get your shorting, you get these thickening up of the zones as well. We do tend to find that the gold are more or less concentrated in the high strain quartz zones. With these parallel, we've got your quartz vein, you've got your mafic. Okay, on the side, you've got your quartz veins. You tend to find that within a lot of sericite chloride alteration occurring within it. We've got accessory sulfide minerals, sulfide minerals, including the pyrite, pyrrhotite, galena, sphalerite, and chalcopyrite. There is sporadic brecciated veins and cataclastic fabrics that can sometimes be observed within an areas. And then we tend to find that the pyrite is commonly aligned along vein shear zone parallel foliations, or is disseminated. It's rarely that we do find massive sulfides. We had a previous slide more or less showed us sort of the mineralization we defined in the diorite. We tend to find in the Falcon zone. We tend to find wide silicified zones spanning on both structures, and sometimes we get to intense deformation through the shear zone, where we're starting to see as well within the Falcon zone and the volcanics. If we compare the Falcon zone, more or less what's the diorite, we do say that gold mineralization is also concentrated in gray to white laminated quartz veins. Native gold is concentrated with the sphalerite, the galena, the pyrrhotite, laminations of chloride sericite. And then we do tend to find the vein spines and swell. The sections range from 20 centimeters up to 2 meters. But steep vertical plunge is we need to investigate on the steep vertical plunge. And typical, what we sometimes see on a daily occurrence is the visible gold within a drill core. Just to find we get the Just a little bit on sulfide zones in terms of the Falcon zone. We've got heavy sulfidation locally present, but often intermediate proximal to high grade. So we do find a little bit of sulfides. More common with wider low grade mineralization, and then we could potentially use this as a possible geophysics target. Looking at exploration potential at Eagle River, potential growth at depth below vein. So there's definitively that we think that there's a down plunge extension of the majority of the zones. Recently we found that intersecting some high grade mineralization down dip of the current. So this is the modeled veins for the 2022 year-end resources. And obviously, as you can see for this year already, we've intersected some additional drilling down plunge of that particular zone. And then obviously in terms of that, looking at our structural analysis, that we tend to find that there is maybe potential for finding a parallel zone within the volcanics. And that's sort of, so there's your Falcon zone, and just west of the Falcon zone, there's potential that we potentially find another zone. Looking again at sort of the near parallel zone, looking at near surface potential exploration targets to find there is potential within the diorite. We could potentially look at that area, which is underexplored, so the potential for mineralization can be found there. And then obviously there at the Falcon zone, just west of that, based on our interpretation of the sinistral strike slip, that we could potentially find another zone. And then just based on that, you can see there's your trend from the previous mineralization over time. Looking a little bit further, I think I did mention probably looking at previously that there you've got your diorite stock, we've got the Falcon zone, we've got the New Lake. So probably based on, you've got some, if you base dikes coming through, then potentially we can potentially find another zone there. If you look on the bigger screen, there's more relation to that area there. And then to the south, to the two zone, which is to the east of the property, there is maybe potential as well for additional. There we got an intersection of 223 grams a ton over 0.4 meters. Looking at regional scale exploration, as I've mentioned, Falcon zone discovery confirms potential in volcanics, and there's obviously some untested regional potential highlighted by the regional structural study. Just looking there, you've got your deformation zone coming through. There you've got your mine, you've got your diorite intrusion. Looking at this area here, which what we call the fault vein. There's potential there. We found another zone there that we could potentially explore. Based on your structural study as well, we've identified more or less 3 targets which we're going to look. So we've got one there towards the northeast, which is, we can see there's abundance of gold occurrence. Unfortunately, due to the ruggedness of the terrain, it's not always easy to get to those areas. Another one where we've got probably a high complex area likely associated with the regional oriclinal belt, faults in our latent orientation. And then which based on a structural, and then obviously there's another one where based on a structural study we've got maybe looking at a similar to the diorite at the Eagle River, which we can potentially target going forward. And just below, just there you've got your Eagle River so layer boundary, and probably looking at a couple of grab samples within them. We're looking at 229 grams a ton. In that area, we've got up to 24 grams, 61 grams a ton. And just to mention as well, on your first hole at the Falkland, we got 27 grams a ton over 1 meter. And with grab samples in excess of 200 grams a ton. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Do you have any questions?
In any of these since the volcano.
Lamprey, I don't,
Not.
no.
If you're totally substated, even in your certification at the
No, I don't think so at this stage. As I said, we're probably just finding that we're getting more tourmaline alteration going to the southeast area.
You can show any area where your shaft location is, or if there's any materials in your sections.
Yeah, I haven't shown it down there.
Your shaft will right down at the bottom
On which one? Pino of Eagle.
of the, yeah, just right there.
If I remember correctly, the shaft is probably going down to about there. So you still have all this ramping down. So it's quite a distance to all material up the ramp from the vertical shafts, more or less in that area.
So the shaft is centrally located.
Centrally located, yes, as always. And then obviously we do tend to find that your southeastern area is where we got the better mineralization these days. We found where.
That's your diorite.
That's your diorite boundary, yes.
So is that usually modified?
It's probably well defined for drilling. Maybe here at the bottom, not as well defined, but obviously on this side we do. It's just pretty well defined. As I mentioned, that these two zones are basically outside of the diorite at this stage.
You had mentioned this transitional zone where you do one salt mine range and no more. It's really high. Oh. So I know, of course, they dominated.
Yes.
It's causing one, like ghost drops a bit of problem.
I'm not 100% sure at this stage if we fully understand that transition. But you just see as we go down, as the sulfides decreases, we see the grade increases.
So the camera project, it is all in the east or to the west for steel. What do you expect to extract all the individual shaft? Is it a big laser available with you? It's going to be wasted down to and eventually that very small down to 220.
Yeah, let me just get to yeah, so Dubuisson is more or less there. So we've got that underground drift that runs up to the Kino mine. So you've got maybe potential to mine at Dubuisson through that. Presqu'île at this stage, we're fortunate enough that that's on a little bit of an island. So that's not under the lake.
Yeah.
And that's what I mentioned, that we potentially look at putting a decline down to link with the current shaft.
They're gonna get a shot, need to place women probably again, right? Now do so it's a narrow lane, you're expanding as large goods. The front is the path that we need, we can increase it.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story. If that is confirmed, if that is confirmed, that's a total different ballgame. It will change everything.
Yeah, and
If that's
that's the problem.
no, I think at that stage you'll probably not hoist through the shaft. That's not too far. That's below, not too far below surface. So you will totally, if it's true, then that will definitely, we'll have to look at a total different method of extracting that.
I have a brand question, Mr. If you can put it on site. The structural evidence would be pretty interesting, well, it was all colored different degrees on there.
Eagle look here.
Yeah, that, so, yeah, how many pages probably the structure based on these, the information, and then the bottom is exactly really clear, like, do you know what we color that based on? So there's
So
some structure that blue and then
I
some.
would probably say that the red ones are the D1. And then obviously that's symbolization, and then obviously you got the D2, which is sort of your blue, and D3, which are post mineralization.
Yeah.
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Not sure. I would probably think it's sort of indicative of the trend, but I can't really comment on how that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for coming to do the talk press, and just a reminder to everyone that we do have the box for any suggestions on who you guys want to hear from, so please use it, and thank you for coming. We'll see you guys in the fall.